Good afternoon. I'm Gina Grillo, president of the Advertising Club of New York, and I hope that everybody is hanging in at home and staying strong. You can be assured that the Ad Club and the Andy Awards are committed to keeping the ad and marketing community connected, even while we're distant. We have transformed our club into a virtual clubhouse, providing members a look into how global brands are innovating and pivoting given the COVID pandemic. Today's webinar is with one of our corporate members. It's a collaboration with Samsung Ads. They see the club as a platform and a community. They came to us with a great idea that's both thoughtful and timely. And we hope that this conversation sparks more collaborations with our members. Of all the things we miss, and I know there's a lot of them, I know that sports is at the top of many of our lists. We have hundreds of people tuning in today, so let me introduce George Carens, Director of Insights at Samsung Ads, and let's get this program started. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. It's a pleasure to be here with the New York Ad Club audience today on behalf of Samsung Ads and our all-star panel from JLR and Anheuser-Busch and the New York Mets. And what we're going to cover today is our topics are going to be about viewership trends in turbulent times. And certainly the pandemic has really caused a lot of shifts in our behavior in television watching. And we're going to focus on some trends that we saw occurring in the fourth quarter of 2019 and only accelerate through the first quarter of 2020. And then we're going to hone in specifically on the sports viewer and how the impact of sports, live sports being shut down, how did that impact their behavior? Did they go to different areas to view content? And then lastly, we're going to hone in on streaming and what has been the behavior shift of consumer audiences, notably sports audiences, in moving into streaming environments. And I know the sports audiences, it's super important to certainly the brands that are on our panel, but all of you that are in the audience today. And some figures that were put out by Nielsen, I think they mentioned there was about 17 billion spent in the US on an annual basis in sports sponsorship, another 17 billion spent in-program advertising. And I think Kantar reported there were $2 billion spent in advertising during the NCAA tournament and the NBA playoffs during normal times, just as really an example of how important reaching these audiences are for brands. So before we get started though, in terms of the source of this information, Samsung Ads we're an advanced TV company, and what we're able to see across 50 million TVs is everything that appears on that screen. In terms of the viewership of program content, whether that linear networks, or whether that's streaming content that occurs within TV apps, or within connected media devices, or in connected consoles. And so a tremendous amount of insight into how are consumers viewing TV across linear and streaming, and what types of content are they viewing in terms of reach and time spent. And we account for, in terms of what we see, about 60% of all of the automatic content recognition that exists in the US. So it's a pretty massive scale of data to glean these insights from. What we did is we thought it would be interesting to take a look at the TV viewership across the first quarter of 2020. To say it's been an eventful year so far is quite frankly an understatement. And what we're going to do is we're going to peg this viewership to key moments that occurred in the first quarter. January 30th, the orange alert from the World Health Organization declaring a global health emergency. We carry that viewership through Super Bowl weekend, and then all the way through the first quarter until March 11th, when that orange alert became a red alert and the World Health Organization announces a global pandemic. This is the point in which a lot of companies were requiring their employees to work from home. Certainly that was the case at Samsung. And then on March 12th, we had all the leagues suspend play. And that certainly had an end to live sports content. But then right after that, a lot of the state governors were requiring a stay-at-home order for a lot of their residents as they were closing down businesses and restaurants and whatnot. All of this had a huge impact on TV viewership. The first thing that we took a look at, we pegged the beginning of the first quarter relative to the last week of the end of the first quarter. And what we saw is just a massive increase in time spent in video. So clearly consumers during this period, they turned to their TVs, and we saw almost a doubling of time spent in video consumption during this period. And what was interesting, it wasn't only time spent, but when we looked at on a typical day at the beginning of the month, towards the end of the month in the first quarter, there were about 40% more TVs tuned in the last week of March than there were in the beginning of January. So just a lot of viewership occurring during this time period. And as I mentioned earlier, we did take a look at some trends in the fourth quarter to understand how they carried through to this first quarter. And we saw a tipping point in the fourth quarter of last year. For the first time in Samsung TVs, more than half of the time spent was in a streaming environment, 51% of the time spent viewing TV. And then when we observed this through the first quarter, it only accelerated. And a lot of this had to do with, stay at home type of behavior. 58% of the time spent by the end of the first quarter was in a streaming environment. So clearly a huge share shift gain in streaming and linear. Then what we did is we took a look at how did this growth occur across the first quarter. And you'll see first through streaming, 132% increase in time spent in a streaming environment. Clearly consumers were finding quality content. They were looking at streaming series. They were looking at, originals that were there. Just a lot of quality. It wasn't all Tiger King, but 132%, that's dramatic in terms of time spent in a streaming environment. But it wasn't the only area that we saw tremendous growth. I mean, look at linear, up 70% in time spent in linear environments in the first quarter alone. We haven't seen that kind of growth, and maybe not even in my lifetime in linear. So pretty dramatic there as well. And what we did is we broke this down across, well, in the linear environment, where were consumers going? What types of content were they drawn to? And the largest increase in terms of genre of content was news, probably not surprisingly. While there were things like an election year and there were debates and whatnot, clearly towards the end of the quarter in March, consumers, particularly here in the US, as the pandemic made its way here, were tuning into news to find out what was the latest that was going on with the pandemic, how was it affecting their local area. So just tremendous growth in news networks. But it wasn't only news. We saw increases occurring across a number of other different areas, lifestyle content. So when you think of the food networks, when you think of the do-it-yourself networks, a lot of people with shelter in place were doing more cooking, more home improvement types of things. Saw tremendous growth in viewership of those types of programs. Children, obviously, with schools being closed, children at home, we saw daycares being closed. We saw more children's programming increase in time spent. And really, the only genre in linear that had a decline in time spent was the sports genre. And when you look at the overall viewers of a Samsung TV, it was about 13% in time spent with that audience declined over that first quarter period. Obviously, a more precipitous drop when live sports went dark. So let's take a look at this sports viewership audience and sports content and dig a little deeper on what these consumers were doing. First of all, I'm going to throw out a chart here and a little quiz question here. What does this trend represent? And it kind of looks like my heartbeat during an episode of Ozark. But I'll give you a hint here. It peaks on the weekends. So all of those peaks represent different weekends, and it's a viewership trend. And it's the viewership of the hours per day viewing sports networks. And you could see early part of the year on the weekends, high levels of viewership. When we hit that March 12th date in pink, that's when live sports went dark. And you can see it kind of flatlined and even declined thereafter March 12th. And so we took a look at for our viewers of the Samsung TV, and we looked at the linear content that they were viewing across different genre. And looking at the beginning of the year, January 6th to the 15th that week, and an equal number of days, the 16th to the 25th towards the end of the first quarter. And if you look at what's in blue there, that was the time spent in the sports networks genre of content, and it decreased by more than half, actually, from 9.7% of the share of those consumers' time went down to only 4.1% of their time. And when you look at what does that represent in terms of a typical week on a Samsung TV at the height of the period before sports went dark, that would equate to about 23 million hours in weekly viewing loss from cable sports networks. You know, that's a lot of massive hours that are being lost. But while we saw content and time spent in sports going away with this audience, it doesn't mean that they weren't watching TV. As a matter of fact, they were watching more TV. It was just in different areas. Streaming almost doubled in terms of time spent with the sports enthusiast audience. And even linear increased almost 40% in terms of time spent. And so we said, well, all right, well, where did these audiences go? What other content did they turn to? And the first thing I want to focus on, though, is that bar on the bottom. When we looked at earlier the overall Samsung TV audience, I think we were showing that 13% of the Samsung audience, or in terms of time spent, we saw a 13% decrease from the beginning of the year to the end of March in sports-related content. For this audience, we took a look at the sports enthusiasts, that top 20% that account for a vast majority of the sports content viewing. And for that audience, it was a much more dramatic drop in terms of time spent in sports content, from 13% all the way actually to 41%. But they did tune to other types of content. We saw dramatic increases in business content, you know, the likes of Fox Business Network, Bloomberg TV, news. They were a big contributor to that 160% increase in news content. So whether that was CNN or MSNBC, Fox News, etc., tremendous gains there. They too needed escapism, this audience. They were finding great content in movies and lifestyle, also had children at home. So really across the board in linear, we were seeing shifting of audience and time spent into these other areas. But we also looked at streaming, and this audience also turned to streaming environments, both AVOD, ad-supported video on demand, and SVOD, subscription video on demand. And what you see here is almost a doubling by the sports enthusiast audience into time spent in AVOD, and almost a doubling in SVOD as well. But what was interesting is when you look at from a reach standpoint, streaming was bringing in new audiences during this time period, during this March time period when we were all sheltered in place. Almost a third more audience was coming into a streaming environment in an AVOD environment, and another 20% in an SVOD environment. So clearly these audiences were finding other content to reach out to. And then what we wanted to take a look at is more specifically, because I think it's important for this group here, is when we're trying to have our brands connect with consumers, is looking at streaming from an AVOD perspective, so ad-supported environment. And we've been tracking the activity in AVOD environments for quite some time. And back in, I think it was July of 2019, it was about 61% of the people that were streaming on a Samsung TV were in an AVOD environment. When we fast forwarded that all the way towards the end of the fourth quarter, that jumped to 75% of streamers on a Samsung TV were in an AVOD environment. So tremendous growth just during that short time period. But it wasn't just a story about reach. It was also a story about time spent. They were finding quality content in an AVOD environment. And this was back at the end of July. While it was 61% of the streamers were using AVOD, it was only 40% of their time. Still not bad. But then when we fast forward to the end of the fourth quarter, that 61% turned into 75% of streamers in an AVOD environment. And their time spent in AVOD also increased by 10%. It went from 40% to 44%. So clearly, you know, whether it was the originals, whether it was quality broadcast and archived, you know, cable programs to up-to-date news, certainly there's an element of consumer affordability in an ad-supported environment. It boded well for both consumers and brands who are trying to reach this influx into streaming. And so, you know, when we think about, you know, looking at post the first quarter as we moved into the second quarter, it wasn't all doom and gloom for these sports networks. They were finding quality content, airing quality content that audiences were driving towards. And if you take a look at this chart here and take a guess at what sports network this might be, this is the NFL Network. And you can probably guess what that event was on April 23rd. It was the NFL Draft. Massive audience glued to that network during that time period. If we take another network, and this is TV's tuned in, you can see we've got some peaks and spikes that occurred in April all the way into May. This is ESPN, and they too simulcast the NFL Draft. That's that largest peak that occurred in April 23rd. But then you see these three other spikes as well. And if you can guess what that is, that was the Last Dance that featured the Chicago Bull on 3 consecutive Sundays. That had great ratings in terms of driving audience. So, when we look back to where we were in the beginning of the year, looking at sports networks and their audience and time spent, you could see that at the end of the first quarter, like I had mentioned earlier, across Samsung TVs, down 13% in time spent. It actually even went further through the early part of April. The bottom of the trough was a 27% decline since the beginning of the year. But we have seen now since then, sports viewership is starting to claw its way back. And I think they're moving from, these weekends that were filled with, dodgeball and cherry pit spinning contests to really some quality content. We've got classic games being aired. We have old documentary libraries being brought forward. Even that Bulls documentary that was supposed to be aired in June, that got pulled forward to April. But we got returning this weekend on Fox and FS1, we've got NASCAR returning their Cup Series. Granted, it won't be in front of a live audience, but that's going to be aired on Sunday. We've also seen NBC announce what they've got planned with the golf match for charity with Tiger Woods and Phil Mickelson and Peyton Manning and Tom Brady. That's going to be airing in the month of May. ESPN announced they're bringing in some of the Korean baseball leagues, or the Korean Baseball League, and airing 6 games or so from there. So you can see the networks are trying to find their groove in terms of content that is more compelling as we have these starved sports audiences looking for quality content. So, bringing it home here in terms of where do we go from here? COVID impact has plateaued on viewership. So while we saw all of those charts going up through the month of March, as we moved into the middle part of April and then into the month of May, overall viewership is actually starting to inch down week by week. And that's across both streaming and linear environments. So there is this kind of flattening that's occurred. Streamers are finding new utility. I mean, I think what we're learning from this period is it's exposing more audiences to a streaming environment. We're bringing people into AVOD environments. And I think not only is it new audience, but I think audiences that maybe were just snacking streaming in the past are spending more time in a streaming environment. And I think it's forming new habits that will have a lasting effect. Linear viewing to reset. News, while it was up 160%, week on week, we see that going down in terms of time spent. As I mentioned earlier, sports, it hit its kind of trough in the early part of April. It is clawing its way back. And then live sports. We're now starting to see some live sports return back, NCAA, UFC, or not NCAA, but NASCAR, UFC. We're going to see some golf come back. It will be interesting as these early shows come back without live audiences. What does that viewership look like? And I think with the sports audiences starved for content, my guess is they're going to do quite well. So thanks for your time this morning to hear what Samsung is seeing in terms of the sports viewer. I'm going to hand it over to and introduce Adam Moylan, who is our Director of Client Advisory, focusing on our automotive brand sector, and Adam's going to lead our esteemed panel. So with that, let me stop sharing and hand it over to you, Adam.
Thanks so much, George. Really appreciate it. And thank you so much to yourself and team for putting together a piece of thought leadership that I know my automotive team and their clients have found incredibly relevant and highly valuable during this time. And I think on a personal level, the interest I had and the data that really stuck out to me as you guys were developing this piece of thought leadership was that immense uptick in viewership that the likes of ESPN and NFL saw during the live NFL draft. And I'm sure historically the NFL draft has absolutely drawn significantly higher levels of viewership over the years, especially compared to the weeks prior. But I think you're going to be hard pressed to find that they're ever going to see a pop like they have this past April. I really think that's indicative of a few things. First and foremost, we have an immense amount of pent up demand and appetite as far as the US population is concerned for all things sports and all things live sports. And then I think the other thing is how people could take this live, this thought leadership, as well as this type of output to use for planning purposes as the US is hoping to get more similar type of events up off the ground and using this type of output to plan in terms of strategy and how best to use their dollars. So thank you so much. And to take a quick step back, thank you so much to the Ad Club for putting this together. As George mentioned, I am Adam Moylan. I'm the Director of Sales here, and I lead the automotive category here. And I've had the distinct pleasure and privilege of being here at Samsung Ads for nearly 5 years, which means I've had the distinct pleasure of being embedded into this whole new world of TV and TV data and streaming, et cetera. And it's been really humbling to see over the past 2 years this evolution in terms of education and adoption of all things ACR. In terms of viewership insights, like what George had presented, as well as using it for attribution purposes as well. And we here at Samsung are very fortunate to sit on the largest repository of ACR, like George said, accessing over 60% market share of the category across 50 million plus TVs. And we extend these type of offerings to all of our paid media customers for viewership insights, attribution purposes, but then also giving access to the data in order to identify very specific audiences across our 42 million homes so that they could activate it across our OTT inventory across the platform. So again, incredibly grateful, as well as the audience that tuned in. And I also want to take the opportunity to give a proper introduction to an amazing stable of panelists that we have here today. If everybody can join on in. Great, excellent. So what I want to do is make sure, like I said, give a proper introduction. I think this is why everybody tuned in on top of the great presentation that George gave. This is just like a very diverse set of stakeholders from very unique backgrounds, as well as very unique organizations. First and foremost, I want to start introducing them. And so we are joined by the executive producer of content and marketing for my beloved New York Mets, Mr. Joe DeVito.
Thanks, Alex.
And we also have here one of our great partners within the automotive vertical from Jaguar Land Rover, a senior specialist of media buying and strategy, Christopher J.S.
Hey.
And we're also joined by Senior Director of Portfolio Media at Anheuser-Busch, Ms. Juliana Wurzberger.
Adam.
Great. Thank you so much. All right, guys. So just to get things teed off, what I wanted to do was kind of create a baseline and kind of get this question out to all three of you. And let's kind of break this up into to two parts. I think, historically, all three of you with your respective organizations prior to this national emergency, engaging with the sports viewer was paramount to your respective functions. But what we'd like to understand is how historically, again, prior to the national emergency, have you used sports to connect with that prime consumer and how you're taking advantage of live sports? But then the second part of that question is, post-national, as we're in the midst of the national emergency and post all of this disruption, how is your channel strategy changed, and how are you pivoting your marketing strategy? So I'd like to offer that up to the group, whoever wants to take the mic first.
Yeah, I can, I beat you to it.
Take it, Chris.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, what I will say is, you know, sports for Jaguar Land Rover is extremely important because it gives us an opportunity to talk to a luxury affluent consumer. You know, we see from our audience data, you know, the ability to talk to them, but also to start seeding our brand with some people who are maybe in more mass market brands and then have the potential to move up into luxury in coming years. So it's certainly an important piece for us for that reason, and it definitely is something that pops for, you know, all of our individual audiences across various different makes and models. So an important piece of the mix. I think, you know, we've obviously had to make tremendous changes to the business, primarily because automotive is a highly considered purchase, both online and offline shopping behaviors. So we've had to kind of respond to the fact that not a lot of people in very high volume areas have the same level of desire to go into the dealership. And so we made a number of changes to our website, focusing on the change to the consumer behavior, looking at promoting different types of actions on the website. We have a really smart and talented digital team. So as we put a pause on some of the production capacity, we were trying to push consumers to look at more local-based inventory. Made a shift in some of our content and advertising to be a little bit more sensitive to the tone that's sort of out in culture now and what people want from brands. So shifting to more entertainment-based content. Living within our production constraints and leaning on some of our partnerships to help us create content that is more stay at home, stay entertained type of content. So a lot of really great work coming out from our social and digital team as well, given the constraints there. And then, you know, obviously changing the sort of balance of some of our media in terms of moving from some more cell-based mediums, as, you know, consumers aren't visiting dealerships in the same capacity. And I'd say the last thing is really working with our retailers to focus on how we can better accommodate the change in customer journey. So everything we've done has really been focused on, you know, how are people engaging with our brand and our retailers right now, and how can we better cater towards sort of the trends that have been emerging from that to provide them with as much utility as possible.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate the very thorough response. Thank you very much. And Juliana, I know you were raring to go as well. Why don't you please take it on?
I think for Anheuser-Busch, you know, I think how sports is a part of our normal mix in a normal world is maybe goes without saying, but I mean, I will say it that it's a key part of our business, right? You know, a lot of our goods are sold during live events, you know, as a part of the enjoyment factor. And I think, you know, it's also from a media perspective, a key place that we interact with our consumers. So with the loss of live sports, we've actually definitely had to repivot. I think in general, you know, we pride ourselves in being very consumer focused, in being very relevant to our consumers. And I think, you know, we've been very clear, even from our CMO directly, we are not in advertising mode right now. And, you know, we really are mostly concerned about providing the consumer value and driving relevance. So, you know, we immediately paused, you know, pretty much all of our heavy product messaging from the get-go, and we took stock with our consumers. You know, we found out that consumers obviously rightfully have a lot on their plates. You know, fear of attracting the virus, financial uncertainty, just general concern about what are they going to do all day, right? So we wanted to make sure that we were being a part of that, and that really inspired us in our marketing efforts for the last 6 to 8 weeks. You know, but also on the flip side of it, we were a lot of the live events that George mentioned, pretty much all of them actually, with the exception of the Last Dance, the NFL draft, the match that's upcoming, NASCAR's return this weekend. These are all things that we are raring to go and we're a large part of if they've already happened. So at this point, you know, we are very hopeful that sports will return soon, but at the end of the day, we also are very concerned about how we drive value for our consumers currently and drive them and give them entertainment and something to look forward to.
Yeah, and I think, you know, and Joe, forgive me, like, you know, for brands and organizations like yourselves, Juliana, as well as Chris, this suppressing of live sports is not just a challenge for you folks here in the US. You guys are both global brands and taking advantage of all these live global events, especially in sports. And I know that's, really big deal for JLR. So Joe, sorry to interject before you got your time, but would love your point of view. So please take it on.
Yeah, no, I think like Chris and Juliana and probably most brands, the first thing we did was we needed to, adjust our tone. Coming from the team side of things, our primary goal is to sell tickets and get people out to a live event. Once that primary goal is removed, you take stock in what your fan base wants and what they need. And I think sports inherently, yes, there's fans and it's transactional, but it's also very much a community. There's a, whether it be the surrounding neighborhoods or beyond where the ballpark is, there's a community aspect to being a fan of a team. So the first thing we did was, kind of assess what we could do for the community, how a brand like the New York Mets can get involved. And that really, by leading with that, I think it set our tone, moving forward. And, the collaborations that we chose to really lean into with our partners, our sponsors, kind of showing why we align with certain brands to begin with, because we have a great deal of both regional, small business and large corporation sponsors that immediately wanted to get involved in the community and see how they can help. And that was sort of the seed that grew into our strategy moving forward. As things got a little bit past the freak out mode and people being, super worried, and I know everyone's still very concerned, but as we started to adjust to a new sense of normalcy and, the stay at home, how we would play a part in that and provide entertainment, but also provide some support and a place for our fans to engage with each other and our brand, that was really important to us. So I think it was a big part of assessing, what our fans really wanted from us, what they needed from us, and how we could provide that. And throughout social media platforms, in cooperation with our broadcast networks, both radio and TV, I think we found a way to balance out messaging between the serious and necessary services that I think we needed to provide, which was to lead with a calm sense of community and a unified sort of, we're all in this together, to also distractionary content and opportunities for our partners to be able to engage with our fans when they weren't able to do so at a ballpark or on TV.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Joe. And like I said, as a avid consumer of SNY and all the handles across your brand, I think you guys are doing a phenomenal job. And it certainly helps to have, personality like Mr. Polar Pete as well.
Yeah,
so
does not hurt.
What I would like to do next is kind of get a layer deeper with some individual questions for all three of you. And also what I want to make very known to the audience is please submit any specific questions, because we absolutely want to try to carve out some time before the top of the hour to address what is on the minds of the audience. Chris, what I would like to do is point this next question specifically to yourself. Handling the automotive category and the purview that I have, what a lot of my clients have been telling us is, this national emergency, this global event has expedited the need for sort of a point, click, and order solution across, their owned and operated web pages, as well as, different relationships with their dealership groups. And I know you elaborated on this quite a bit in sort of your initial response to the group question, but what I would like to get from yourself is a layer deeper as far as, now that consumers' buying habits are primarily online by default, the process presents an interesting obstacle. So the buyers are doing most of their research online historically, but basically all of the sales have been done in retail within your respective dealerships. So what challenges have you faced in meeting as well as staying with the consumers on their path to purchase, and when the actual point of purchase is beyond the reach of traditional marketing? If you wouldn't mind possibly getting a layer deeper there.
Yeah, I think this is where I go back to, looking really closely at how consumers are engaging with our digital experiences and what types of things they're searching out, really pulling out some of those nuanced journeys. I think, as I said before, it's a small change to make the adjustment from pushing people towards building and configuring vehicles that they couldn't potentially order at that point in time, or could have ordered but on a more delayed schedule, towards potentially looking more at inventory that exists on retailer lots. So small things like that can have a really big impact in terms of enabling some of that journey. But we're just one piece of that puzzle, right? We can only do so much as a tier one brand, and working really closely with our retail partners. I mean, we have some of the best retailers out there. And I guess they were already moving in that direction of online sales. I mean, that's something that's been happening over the last 2 to 3 years, and there's some amazing vendors out there doing really great work in that space. I think it's really just accelerated that and put a little bit more pressure on us to figure it out a bit quicker than we maybe otherwise would have. And some of our retailers were doing a lot in that space, and others were maybe a little bit more reluctant to do so. But I think I pretty much tripled the number of retailers who are on programs like that over the course of the last month. So they're very receptive to it, and it's been successful thus far.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And just to kind of compliment and sort of second some of the things you were saying there, what we have heard from OEM partners as well as a faction of the dealership groups is, this sort of like notion of online ordering. They really kind of saw it as being 60 months away, 5 years away. And now this is compressing that where everybody is needing a solution and working with their dealership groups in different ways to come up with something in the next 12 to 24 months. So this is absolutely, like you said, expedited a much different behavior in terms of how cars are going to be bought and sold.
Yeah, and I think just to follow on that, what's really interesting about this time is inevitably we forced, and this isn't just specific to us, I think this is specific to almost every single business out there, we've forced consumers to engage with our brands in a completely different way for an elongated period of time in some of the most affluent, high buying power areas of the country. So when you think about the behaviors that probably would have evolved on a slow burn time scale that we've really just forced into the sort of spotlight, people are going to come out of this and they are going to be doing things different ways. Much like, you guys were talking about with regards to streaming behavior. I think there are probably a lot of people who weren't avid streamers before who are now dipping their toe in to get some fresh content, and they'll come out of this being, regular streamers. So it will be interesting to see how the auto shopping process goes back to normal, and how it also kind of stays in this different world of more online transactional.
It could feel daunting, Chris, but it's going to be incredibly exciting times. There's going to be a lot of breakthroughs in terms of innovation, and not just specific to the automotive market. Juliana, if you don't mind, I want to direct the next question to yourself. One of the things I was hoping that you could elaborate on and give a deep point of view. We were talking last week, and we know that not just your North American CMO, Marcel, but as well as your global CMO has been very vocal about marketing during COVID. And so I'd like to get your take, being a major stakeholder representing some of the most powerful brands and household names. What has been your organization's philosophy in terms of connecting during this time? And again, I also want to preface it with, I realize you touched on some of this in the very beginning, but just an opportunity to get a layer deeper here.
So, I think I pretty much touched on it, but again, we're not necessarily in what we would call traditional advertising mode, right? And I think, again, everything has been very consumer focused, driving relevance, driving value. To touch on maybe some of the more specific efforts we're doing, just to give color on how that's coming to life. On the serious side of things, maybe from more around fear of virus, concern over first responders, maybe how to even help yourself, feel that you're contributing to the effort. Budweiser, for example, started an initiative called One Team. And that actually, from our core sports, friends in the leagues, we were able to mobilize with the Red Cross to dedicate spaces at unused venues right now to do blood drives. Also support the Red Cross. Also maybe, and then we also need to take stock of the people that are affected by this, who are a part of our family, are part of our system, right? The on-premise, which is basically, bars, restaurants, sporting venues, right? So we mobilized an effort under the lens of Bud Light called Open for Takeout, where 150,000 different consumers went online to tell us what are their favorite bars and restaurants that are still open for business, open for takeout. So that could let people know that they're still open and they can order from them.
Yeah.
Again,
sorry, go ahead, Julianne. Sorry.
I was gonna, and a couple more to add is just on the boredom side or on the adding value and keeping people busy. Stella Artois also, but with a lens on how to help. They're doing cooking sessions at home with some really famous chefs, and encouraging consumers to buy gift cards, to help their local consumers. And Ultra, just to also mention that one, we're doing workout sessions, right? Called Movement.
Right.
So also like giving local gyms and trainers something to do, right? And helping them benefit as well. So again, really consumer focused. What are the pillars that we could really own with our branding, but also provide value for communities and our partners.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say, Juliana, is like, as we were talking last week, you were quick to point out, I had asked you, how have your partnership changed? You've got some decades-long partnerships with, the 3-letter leagues and things of that nature. But you were very quick to say, it's like some of these partnerships have not changed. And I would like for you to elaborate on that, but then based on how you're engaging with consumers based on this new reality, it seems like you have some new partnerships as well.
Yeah, the 3-letter leagues, but the 3-letter networks too, right? We're all in it together. I think if anything, the absence of live sports really just we talk more often. We talk about what are those really awesome opportunities we can bring to life together. Again, how do we help consumers? How do we benefit consumers? Our partners all want to do the same at the end of the day. They're lacking a lot of that pipeline of content too. So how do we do something special together? I think the draft was a perfect example of that. Because no one was allowed to be live at the draft, which is such a big event at Radio City normally, we worked together with the NFL to allow fans to boo the commish. That is a long-standing tradition that when Goodell gets up, everyone's like, boo. So we worked out a mechanism on Twitter where fans could boo him, but also help donate money to a good cause, right? So, and Goodell got in on it. We had custom content about it. And we were able to capitalize on what was probably the highest rated draft in forever, right? So that was a very key kind of partnership with the NFL and with Disney, to help me and the NFL Network to make that happen.
Yeah. I thought that was incredibly well done, and the data shows you guys nailed the right timing in terms of being in front of a live viewing audience. So thanks a lot, Julian. I appreciate that. Mr. DeVito, now on to my favorite franchise here. And again, we were talking a little bit last week, and I know you touched on this as well in the beginning. But what we would like to get a better understanding of is, as the franchise and as the brand, the orange and blue, what new initiatives or programs have the Mets, been offering to consumers? And again, I know that you got a chance to touch on that a little bit, but would like to get a deeper understanding as to how you're currently continuing the conversation, while baseball is on pause, and how you think that's going to shift over the next 3 or 4 months, if it's going to shift at all.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we have been working hard on is getting the league to play ball with us, no pun intended, but working with MLB to bring down some of the barriers that we would have when it comes to streaming content and access for our fans. I think, an initiative that we looked at immediately was, how do we utilize YouTube as our broadcast network, essentially? We don't have time restrictions there. Obviously, Twitter, Instagram, everything else, we fit a lot of things into those boxes. But I think one of the things, something as simple, and it's certainly not groundbreaking, is TBT theater. On Thursdays, we'll put up a classic game. We'll give fans access to something that they typically have to wait for a broadcast network to decide to program. And that was one of the first things, because it was easy. It was already done. It was baked, ready to go. We put it up on YouTube, and it did really, really well for us. And then the next layer was, of course, tapping into access to our players. We're very lucky as a ball club to have a lot of young players. You mentioned Pistol Pete, Polar Bear, Jeff McNeil, Marcus Stroman. A lot of our players are really eager to communicate with fans via social media, and they love themselves enough to film themselves working out and doing everything that I guess fans wonder, what do these guys do during the off season? Well, now we're getting a great look at that. And the answer is a resounding stay in shape and be competitive with one another, whether it be on video games with MLB The Show or, and obviously all the great community outreach that Pete and these guys have done. So I think, opening up our players to the fans was something that we're very lucky to be able to do. That seems to always do well with our audience and our partners. And our partners jump in on that, and they see the kind of attention that Pete and Marcus and everybody gets. And now they come to us and say, hey, we have an idea. We have an initiative. How do we align with you guys and get that content out to our fans and our customers?
Thanks for that, Joe. And this is like so perfect. One of the user-generated questions that came on in from the audience, I think, really kind of touches on that last piece. And I'd really like to, if you want to elaborate, but this as well as Juliana and Chris, the question that really popped out for myself here is The Last Dance, a documentary which is attracting somebody is saying between 6 and 7 million viewers with a lot of branding exposures and sponsorship opportunities. How can brands, and I guess coming from your unique organizations and the sporting community, utilize or co-create similar content in the future? So whoever wants to kind of take that on, please take the mic.
I'll start it off and then
please.
pass it on to Juliana and Chris. Having a TV background, when things do really well, it always seems like a brilliant new idea. There's a lot of content out there that has great sponsorship marketing opportunities, great brand exposure, integrated marketing opportunities in it. Something about Michael Jordan is going to do well, especially at a time where we're all starving for sports content. I think the lesson to take away here is that quality is always going to trump quantity. This was done in a really, really strong way. It was done about a strong figure, and it was done really well at a time where people were really looking for something to invest in. The binge culture and everything else that we have going on right now, they went to a more traditional method of a weekly release, kept people for the first time in a long time setting their watch to say, okay, it's Sunday night at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, whatever. I'm going to tune in. And I think that what I'd like to see is that the brand and marketing opportunities are always going to be there. And I would love for everyone to tune into a amazing 10-part Mets documentary brought to you by Land Rover and Budweiser, but on a Samsung device, of course. But I think I'd like to see that it shows people that elevated content is always going to get the eyeballs, and to challenge content creators like myself and my colleagues to say, how do we create something where brands want to align with us that's going to make fans tune in and engage with all different touch points there.
Awesome, Joe. Well said.
Jump in too. I think this is like a two-part situation, right? So I think there's definitely opportunities where really strong content providers are going to provide very strong content, and then they open it up to a wealth of advertisers who then have the choice to get super involved, create bespoke content like State Farm did, or maybe not, and just kind of like run whatever messaging they need to run for that moment. I think at AB, we very much are, let's do something bespoke as much as we can. We weren't allowed. We didn't have the opportunity to be a part of the. We didn't buy in, I guess, early enough, you could say. So we had the pleasure of being part of the encore presentations, which is great. But that being said, we're actively running our What's Up 2.0 creative, right? Which is very contextually relevant, a very great moment to be running against that documentary. So we're taking advantage of it that way. We have the bespoke content, but we couldn't necessarily be a part of the original series broadcast. But that being said, I think there's also the opportunity for companies to have really great content that is surrounded by a consumer insight or consumer need, and then work with their partners to bring that to life, right? So we do that at AB quite often, actually. It's maybe doesn't have the ratings of The Dance, but it's The Last Dance, but it's still really good stuff. I mean, around Super Bowl specifically, we did a music fest, right, where we were working with Fox to bring that to life, where we had great performers and we added value to the Super Bowl weekend. that was televised on Fox. So, I mean, there are, I think, again, opportunities where it's about what do you have to bring to the table, but then also do you have the right partner, but then also how do you react to those more, I guess, open to the public type of opportunities, open to the industry type of opportunities, and how are you driving relevance to really stand out and be impactful?
Yeah. No.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to dovetail off of what these two have said, and there's really nothing more to add to a lot of that. But from JLR's perspective, I mean, we've always been really heavily rooted in entertainment. Beyond just some of the standard, buying media surrounding pieces. I think Juliana said it best. It's, doing good contextual and relevant advertising that surrounds a larger program, and hopefully via some of the upfronts picking what you think some of those really great properties might actually be, and then producing around that, can yield some really great results, because it, the advertising then doesn't necessarily feel as much of a departure from the entertainment side of things as it does just merely an extension. And I think that's where you need to be really cognizant of what shared equity do you have as a brand with the programming that you're potentially tapping into.
Yeah.
And we've done some programming with CNN last year around the race to space, and the notion of adventure and exploration has been heavily rooted in the Land Rover brand. We basically remade one of our TVCs, it kept the same theme, never stop discovering, but rooted it in some custom content that we did. So we had some really great relevant and contextual advertising that ran along with the TV premiere. We then had some great shoulder content with some of the people that starred in that to live on the digital experience. We took part of the IMAX experience with that as a whole as well. So those are, when those pieces can come together, it can be really powerful, but they definitely require a lot more heavy lifting, and it's not something that you can apply to everything inevitably.
No, it's a great additive response on top of two very sort of like thoughtful and robust responses from Joel and Juliana. Chris, because of your brand and your role, we certainly have an audience that, may be heavy on the automotive side. So coming from the automotive community, I received a question that I thought was particularly interesting. And if you feel comfortable answering this, obviously the automotive category is feeling its challenges, in terms of furloughs and things of that nature. But specifically, with the challenges from an economic standpoint, for your luxury brand, do you think there will be more of an emphasis on the certified pre-owned as a gateway into the brand, particularly with rising lease returns going to auction in the next few months? And if you feel comfortable possibly responding to that, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think it's still probably a little bit early for us to really make that call. I don't think we necessarily know whether that will be the case for us specifically. I mean, we're fortunate to have a group of consumers who seem to be somewhat recession resilient, I will say, at least on some of the higher end models. But I think CPO has always been something that's been important for us, and I think will continue to be important for us. The brands have been growing tremendously over the last couple of years, and so we are increasing the size of our CPO sales, or as a proportion of our new. So I think it will definitely continue to play a large role, but I'm not sure it will take on any additional focus for us, because again, it's always been something that we found to be a very important piece of the brand and getting people into some of the brand new products as well.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chris. Appreciate that. So folks, we do have a few more minutes, and Juliana, there's a lot of people that are most interested in knowing, what AB is doing with all of those kegs of beer, within the stadiums that are sitting there. I'm not expecting you to respond to that if you want, but I wanted to make it known that is a very popular question that's coming through in my interface right here. So one of the things I thought was interesting here is, and I'm just going to read it verbatim, is given the shift to streaming, and this would be for all three of you, what do you think of all the new streaming services? We've got sort of like the arms race in terms of OTT and ad-supported services, the Peacocks, the CBSs, the Quibbies of the world. Which will, in your opinion, which will consumers pay for, and how will you approach advertising in new ways? And Juliana, just I see your head nodding. If it's okay to start with yourself, if that's all right.
Because we were talking about this earlier today, just in normal workday life. So we actually We are a premier sponsor with Quibi for their launch, which is really exciting. We love that opportunity. I think for me, the streaming services that stand out are, the ones that really have that like tentpole, that are pushing that like tentpole programming. I mean, I brought this up earlier this morning. I think what Disney Plus did, for example, with Hamilton this morning, how they announced that it will be available July 3rd.
Yeah.
Brilliant, right? They're really driving consumers to sign on with programming that they can't get anywhere else. I think any streaming service, like the Peacocks, like the HBO Maxes of the world, even like the Hulus, whoever has like a key tentpole kind of piece of programming that incentivizes consumers to join is going to be really great. I'm really hopeful for Quibi, and I hope that they they continue to grow, because I think their offering is super interesting, and we're leaning in.
Yeah, the next 24 months are going to be incredibly interesting with this explosion of content.
Yeah.
Joe, if I could pose that question to yourself, I know it may take on a little bit of a different meeting with your organization or brand, and again, not to put you on the spot, but let me know if you've got a point of view on that topic.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm going to tap into my background pre-sports on this. I mean, coming from TV, mid-90s, MTV, I've seen the landscape change a lot, and the a la carte streaming, app-based sort of, services. I think we're in the Wild West version of it right now, and it's great because I think a lot of people are being challenged to one-up each other for, who's got the better content. I don't know who's going to win. I don't know necessarily what the future looks like. Our part in it, in my current life, is that we put together a Cinderella season and give somebody a great opportunity to make an amazing documentary about the Mets next championship. And then I'm happy to work with everyone on figuring out how to integrate ads into that. From a club standpoint, we look at these opportunities. Our social media is our broadcast network. SMY is our partners for other things. We do have a lot of outlets, but I'm just seeing so much success with user generated, and by user I mean professional ball player generated. Yep. And club generated stuff that I think in a weird way it comes and goes pretty quickly in the social media cycle, but I think there is a lasting something lasting coming out of this specific pandemic, is that you're seeing SNL put on show on air from home. You're seeing, the Daily Show do that. And you're seeing our ball players do it in a way. And I think whether it's structured, it's the John Krasinski, Some Good News, or whatever it might be, it's getting everyone to at least look inward and say, okay, well, that's what it used to be. What is it now? How much of this stuff kind of lingers into the new normal? And even if everything went back completely to the way it was, I don't believe that there won't be some lasting effect of what we've seen here as far as good old homemade content and how organic and endearing that is to our fans and our viewers and our partners and everyone that consumes our content. And I think that something that could be really positive that comes out of this.
Yeah, and I think like you just said, you guys taking advantage of your young players, and I also think you guys have the added benefit of having great partners over at SNY in Gary, Keith, and Ron. And who doesn't want to see Mr. Hernandez cats all day long? Yeah. Chris, we're almost up at the top of the hour, but I want to make sure you get an opportunity. I know JLR is very much leaned into the OTT space, but love to get your kind of take as far as on this arms race. What consumers will be willing to pay for, and if you've got a personalized approach within this advertising medium.
So I was thinking about this as that question came up. It's a really interesting question, because we're sort of on the tipping point of where you will almost find people now via some of the services that they've signed up for paying competing rates, if you add everything together, for what would arguably be included as a part of cable. So it's going to be interesting to see how many of these are able to find a sustainable business model, because content to a degree is becoming commoditized as a part of all of this, and creativity is really the only thing that wins. So, yes, I think from the base level, we always look to be very rooted in the entertainment space by being a part of some of these productions early on. So finding those great shows really early on and getting some good product integration, a fantastic team that works very specifically on that and does a great job there. I think in terms of the advertising, I think some of these new services, obviously need to prove themselves a bit first to a degree, because our budgets aren't maybe as big as some of our other friends are. Yeah, I think we'll always be looking towards who's continually putting out really great content that people are over-indexing on, and we'll look to join in those spaces.
Thanks, Chris. Well, listen, guys, we are at the top of the hour, and I'm not surprised that this was so easy to fill 60 minutes worth of time with the great content. I had the easiest job of anybody here, just being able to ride off the coattails of George and his analytics team, and then just being able to pose questions to these three great panelists, just coming with a very unique point of view because of your unique backgrounds, the different types of organizations that you guys work with. So I just want to say from me to you, thank you so much, Joe, Juliana, and Chris, and I wish you the best of luck. And I really think you guys are primed in position to kind of really take on what the back half of the year is going to mean in terms of marketing and advertising. So thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adam.
Excellent. So, and now I'll kick it on off to Gina, and special thanks to everybody that tuned into the engagement, as well as sent on over some very thoughtful and funny questions. I'm sorry I couldn't get to them all. And a special thanks to the Ad Club. So thanks so much, and have a terrific rest of Tuesday, everyone.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you, Samsung Ads, for the partnership. We loved building this content with you. To the marketers that participated, brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective, and we're really excited about the second half also. We all wait in anticipation for that. And mostly to the tune-ins, people that came in today and spent an hour with the Ad Club in our virtual clubhouse. Thank you for joining us. There's a survey that follows, so if you can be so kind as to fill that out so we can keep the great programming coming. Have a great rest of your day, and thanks, everybody.